要想保护好炎盟和萧家，必须将魂殿斩草除根。
In episode 160 preview, we will see Xiao Yan return to the Yan alliance and take bold steps to reorganize the Alchemy Hall. With arrogant alchemists stirring trouble, he wastes no time showing his authority and proving his unmatched 8th grade alchemy skills. Meanwhile, preparations for his long-awaited wedding with Cai Lin are underway, bringing both excitement and tension to the alliance. To protect the Yan League and the Xiao family, the Soul Palace had to be completely destroyed. Xiao Yan turned back toward the towering fortress wall, and in the next instant, the air erupted with thunderous cheers. The cries of the Yan League will not fall, and long live the leader, rolled like thunder across the battlefield. A small smile tugged at his lips. Beside him, Cai Lin spoke lightly, her voice as cool as ever, remarking that he had gone and made himself a lone hero again. Her tone might have been cold, but the faint curve of her mouth betrayed the joy she felt inside. Xiao Yan chuckled and shook his head. So many years had passed, yet Cai Lin remained exactly the same. The 3 elders of the Hu family hurried over, their faces lit with excitement. They laughed and said the young master truly never ceased to surprise them. Even the Blood River Venerable had fallen before him. That old monster had once been infamous across Zhongzhou, although never for anything good. Their eyes were full of admiration. Xiao Yan returned their praise with a polite smile and assured them that once they returned, they would be rewarded. The Dou Zun masters quickly waved their hands in protest, saying that with the reputation of Yao Chun, they had no fear of being cheated. Xiao Yan let out a quiet laugh. Meanwhile, Xiao Li and Xiao Ding had already begun mobilizing troops to clear the battlefield. The city wall was now buzzing with activity. Then a crisp, childlike voice rang out, calling her father mighty. The words struck straight into Xiao Yan's heart, and a radiant smile spread across his face. He turned toward the sound, and saw little Xiao Xiao nestled in Cai Lin's arms. A special warmth surged in his chest. He reached out, lifted Xiao Xiao into his arms and kissed her cheek. She gave a slightly pouty look in response, which only made him burst into laughter. At that moment, the mark between her eyebrows lit up. A streak of colorful light flashed out, and a small serpent appeared on her shoulder, flicking its tongue playfully at Xiao Yan. He blinked in surprise and said that this was the 7-colored sky-swallowing python. Cai Lin nodded and explained that the 7-colored sky-swallowing python had not been completely taken over by her. Its soul had been reborn together with Xiao Xiao's body, and in return, Xiao Xiao could borrow its power. This meant that she had been born with the strength of a Dou Zun master. Xiao Yan's brows rose slightly. The 7-colored sky-swallowing python was the pinnacle of snake-type magical beasts, at its peak, even capable of challenging a Dou Sheng. With that kind of power, 1 girl and 1 serpent fighting together would be an incredibly powerful force. Still, Xiao Yan knew better than anyone that borrowed strength was never truly one's own. He remarked that his daughter could not rely on the power of others forever. She was still young, and he would not force her to grow too quickly, but he would make sure she had the best possible conditions for cultivation. A determined heat flashed in his eyes. Xiao Xiao would one day become the most extraordinary existence, because she was his daughter. He looked down at her tiny face, eyes filled with pride and warmth. From the side, Cai Lin's cold expression softened. Xiao Xiao meant more to her than her own life, and seeing Xiao Yan treat their daughter with such care was the most important thing in her heart. She smiled faintly and said that Xiao Xiao already had excellent conditions. She reminded him of the heavenly soul bloodbone pill he had sent back that year. Even before she was born, it had given her a strong physique. At the mention of it, Cai Lin's gaze lingered on him a moment longer. Back then, she had been ready to die. If Xiao Yan had not delivered that pill on time, she would have ignored him completely from then on. She was stubborn by nature and never regretted her decisions. Fortunately, he had not let her down. Before leaving the Blackhorn region, he had specifically instructed Xiao Li to deliver the pill. But Xiao Yan only shook his head. The heavenly soul bloodbone pill was good, but not enough. His standards were much higher now. Though the pill built a decent foundation, it was far from perfect. He told Cai Lin that the snake people had probably never met a true alchemy master, which was why their secret techniques had only reached the 3rd tier. The heavenly soul bloodbone pill was, at best, a low-grade 7th rank pill. It could help with foundation building, but it still had its limits. He turned toward the others on the city wall, and said that while the heavenly soul bloodbone pill was good, there were many stronger pills. For example, the Xian Pu foundation building pill was a peak 7th rank elixir, and would suit Xiao Xiao far better. However, even for him, there was only a 40% chance of refining it successfully. If they attempted it, he might have to step in personally. A voice suddenly interrupted. Xiao Yan glanced over and saw Master Gu He, the Dan King, approaching with several elderly alchemists in uniform trailing behind. Xiao Yan's expression turned slightly curious. Gu He must have joined the Yan League after his departure. He also noticed something odd in the elders' gazes. Alongside respect, there was an unspoken undercurrent, something between pride and doubt. Xiao Yan greeted Master Furukawa with a smile and a polite gesture. Gu He bowed slightly, saying that the leader had been away for years, and that it was truly admirable. In truth, Gu He's feelings were complicated. The infamous wedding incident with the Yunlan sect had humiliated him, but he had never held too much hatred for Xiao Yan. Later, losing to him in the alchemy competition had led him to join the Yan League. Over the years he had focused solely on alchemy, rising to the level of a senior 7th-rank alchemist, one of the very best in the northwest continent. Still, with Xiao Yan gone, he had quietly become the most influential alchemist in the league. Now, with Xiao Yan's return, a trace of resentment he had kept buried began to surface. Dantang, under Gu He's leadership, had thrived and made an enormous contribution to the league's rapid growth. In fact, without it, the Yan League would not be where it was today. Cai Lin stepped closer to Xiao Yan, speaking in a low voice meant only for him. She explained that Dantang's position was too important. Its success was the reason for the league's rapid rise, but that was also why some within it had grown arrogant. Some even thought that without Dantang, there would be no Yan League. It had grown somewhat independent. She admitted that although she was strong, she was not an alchemist, and to the members of Dantang, her prestige did not compare to Gu He's. Xiao Yan's eyes narrowed slightly as he understood the problem immediately. If left unchecked, Dantang's growing arrogance would become a cancer to the league. Alchemists had always thought themselves above ordinary warriors, and with their hall's critical role, that pride had only deepened. Even some leaders treated them with excessive deference. This could not be allowed to continue. He turned back to Gu He and said that while the Xianpu pill was good, it was not the best option. Then he asked if Gu He had heard of an elixir called the Shi Dan. At those words, Gu He and the elders stiffened, their eyes widening. They exclaimed in surprise that it was an 8th-grade elixir. Gu He looked at Xiao Yan in disbelief, asking if the leader could really refine 8th-grade elixirs. The elders behind him exchanged looks of shock and doubt. For them, Gu He had always been the highest standard to aspire to. Although they had heard tales of Xiao Yan's feats, they had never imagined he could surpass their own master. Xiao Yan explained calmly that 8th-grade elixirs were distinguished by the color of the pill, and that the Shi Dan drew 5-colored pill thunder when formed. He instructed Master Gu He to gather every single alchemist in the Dan Hall the following day. He would refine the Shi Dan in public, and attendance would not be optional. Anyone who failed to show up would be expelled from the Yan League immediately. His tone was sharp, his eyes fixed firmly on Gu He. The Dan King felt his heart jolt. There was no mistaking it. Xiao Yan was about to reorganize the Dan Hall. Xiao Yan understood the habits that had taken root in the Dan Hall over the years. Cai Lin might be strong, but she didn't know how to refine medicine, and without that skill, she could never truly establish authority among alchemists. He, however, was different. His alchemy skills had long since surpassed Gu He's. If he had already reached the level of a 7th-grade alchemist, then stepping into the 8th-grade Grandmaster realm was not beyond his reach. Several Dan Hall elders exchanged uneasy glances. Even Cai Lin in all these years had never spoken to Gu He in such a direct and forceful way. Yet the moment Xiao Yan returned, he was already moving against the Dan Hall. This was no small matter. Gu He finally sighed, bowing slightly. He said that he would return and gather the people, asking Xiao Yan to come the following day. Turning with several elders in tow, he left the scene. He knew that the moment word spread, the Dan Hall would be thrown into chaos. Xiao Yan watched their figures disappear, his eyes narrowing slightly. Cai Lin's voice carried a trace of concern as she asked whether this was appropriate. The words, she noted, had been too blunt. Those arrogant alchemists might feel dissatisfied. Xiao Yan only responded lightly that she was taking such inferior alchemists far too seriously. In Zhongzhou, these men would barely make a living. If they left, they could simply be replaced. Now that there was a spatial wormhole connecting Xingyun Pavilion and the Yan League, he could travel freely between the two. As for alchemists, he could invite far better ones from Zhongzhou itself. With his reputation, and Yao Lao's, in the Zhongzhou alchemy world, even 7th-grade alchemy masters would flock to join them. The quality would be leagues above what the Dan Hall currently had to offer. He mentioned that he had been planning to make some medicine for Xiao Xiao anyway. Tomorrow, he would open the Alchemy Hall, refine an elixir, and use it to deter the Hall. It was time to set things straight. Xiao Yan gently patted the small child in his arms, his tone firm. Cai Lin nodded. She too had endured her share of disrespect from the Dan Hall over the years, holding her temper for the sake of the bigger picture. But now that Xiao Yan had returned, she knew he would not allow such arrogance to continue. She then spoke softly, telling him that some elders of the Dan Hall had not even appeared yet. These, she said, were the real troublemakers, among them 2 7th-grade alchemists who had joined later. They were far too arrogant. According to the information she had gathered, they might have even been secretly selling the Hall's pills, though without evidence she could do nothing. A cold light flashed in Xiao Yan's eyes. Xianhuang Fortress was the Yan League's most important stronghold outside the Ma Empire, and a large number of Dan Hall members were stationed there. With the war breaking out, nearly 80% of the Hall's members were currently in the fortress branch. Years of smooth sailing had bred arrogance among them. With Xiao Yan absent for so long, some of the alchemists who joined later had only heard his name. The sense of awe they felt was far weaker than that of the other factions within the League. The Dan Hall's branch here was in the northwest section of Xianhuang Fortress. It occupied a vast area and enjoyed the best treatment among all the League's divisions. The moment he returned with news that Xiao Yan planned to reorganize the Dan Hall, the place had erupted. Many of these alchemists barely gave Cai Lin the time of day. Now, with Xiao Yan stepping in, they were naturally displeased. Inside the grand hall of the branch, noise filled the air. An old man in gray snorted coldly, saying that the leader was truly majestic, returning only to meddle in the affairs of the Dan Hall. Without the Hall, he claimed, the Yan League would never have reached its current state. The badge on his chest bore 7 golden ripples, a mark of a 7th-grade alchemist. The moment he spoke, several others voiced their agreement. He sat at the head of the hall, frowning but saying nothing. He was skilled at refining pills, but leadership was never his strength. Beside him sat Fa Ma, the former president of the Alchemist Guild, who kept his eyes closed and made no comment, as though he had heard nothing. A long-haired elder joined in, urging He to speak to the leader. The Dan Hall, he argued, was unlike other places. Even the deputy leader had not dared interfere. Over the years, they had made great contributions to the League, and while they welcomed the leader's return, meddling in the Hall's affairs would only cause unrest. He frowned again, glancing toward Fa Ma, but the old guild president still didn't react. In the end, he could only explain that the leader was also an alchemist, and that his skill far surpassed theirs. He was not an outsider to their craft. But the long-haired elder objected, saying that the leader was away most of the year, and that the Dan Hall was no longer what it used to be. He might be young and talented, but refining an 8th-grade elixir was another matter entirely. They were all senior 7th-grade alchemists, and they knew the difficulty of advancing to the 8th rank. With the leader's youth, his chances should be slim. Lu Chong gave a derisive laugh. He, losing patience, told them to stop concerning themselves with the leader's affairs. All they needed to do was be present the next day, and not make any foolish mistakes. If they had no guilty conscience, they had nothing to fear. Reluctantly, Lu Chong and several other elders left with their people, frowning as they went. The hall fell quiet. He dismissed the remaining attendants before turning to Fa Ma and asking what he thought. Fa Ma finally opened his eyes, speaking in a calm, measured tone. He said that he knew better than anyone how the hall's atmosphere had changed over the years. Lu Chong and his clique had grown powerful precisely because he couldn't rein them in, and their arrogance had only deepened. His advice was not to get involved. Fa Ma reminded him that the leader's methods were ruthless when necessary. The Dan Hall might be important, but it was nothing compared to the leader's goals. If he wished, even disbanding it was not impossible. More importantly, with the leader's strength and vision, he might not even think much of the hall in its current state. The words left He stunned, but he knew they were true. Fa Ma went on to say that this time, the Dan Hall would face a major upheaval. The leader would not sit idly by. It was fortunate that he had not involved himself too deeply in certain matters. Otherwise, escape would be impossible. All they could do now was wait and see what happened to those men the next day. He could only give a bitter smile and nod. When the first rays of sunlight fell upon Xianhuang Fortress the next morning, the Dan Hall was already buzzing with activity. The alchemists who had received the order gathered early at the Alchemy Square. Fa Ma, and other senior members were already waiting, As Gui's gaze swept across the hundreds of alchemists present, he noticed that Lu Chong and Wu Zun were absent. Inwardly, he cursed the two of them for not knowing what was good for them. Just then, several figures descended from the sky. Xiao Yan appeared above the square, flanked by his companions. Gu He and the others immediately saluted, and the rest of the alchemists followed suit. Xiao Yan's eyes swept over the crowd before he gave a slight nod and descended onto the central stone platform. His voice was calm but carried through the square. He said that today, he would open the cauldron to refine an 8th grade elixir, and that they should watch closely. It would benefit them greatly in the future. The moment his words fell, shock rippled through the gathered alchemists. An 8th grade elixir. There were only a handful of people in the entire northwest continent capable of refining such a thing. Xiao Yan sat down cross-legged. With a wave of his hand, the medicine cauldron floated steadily in front of him. Around him, powerful medicinal herbs swirled in the air, releasing faint but rich medicinal fragrance. Just then, Lu Chong and Wu Zun rushed over with dozens of people in tow. Lu Chong bowed slightly to Xiao Yan, a faint smile on his face, and commented that they were a step late and had almost missed the leader's alchemy session. Xiao Yan glanced at them, his tone light but carrying a weight that made people straighten unconsciously. He told them that since they were here, they might as well sit down. Lu Chong and Wu Zun exchanged a quick look, a trace of surprise flashing in their eyes. Only then did they begin to realize that Xiao Yan was not someone to be underestimated. Xiao Yan snapped his fingers. A burst of purple-brown flames rushed into the medicine cauldron. One after another, hundreds of medicinal herbs were refined in perfect sequence, each step flowing like water without the slightest stagnation. As the medicinal materials continued to be refined, a vast soul pressure radiated from Xiao Yan's body. All the alchemists nearby felt their expressions change drastically. A deep sense of awe rose in their hearts. Lu Chong and Wu Zun even shuddered slightly, their eyes filling with a mixture of horror and disbelief. Such a level of soul pressure could only belong to an 8th grade alchemy master. That meant Xiao Yan had truly stepped into the realm of the 8th grade. He let out a slow breath, murmuring to himself that this soul pressure was terrifying. Ma smiled faintly, casting a glance toward the stunned Lu Chong and Wu Zun. A sneer tugged at his lips. The days when these two old men strutted arrogantly within the Dan Hall seemed to be coming to an end. Inside Dantang, the air was tense yet filled with anticipation. Xiao Yan stood on the alchemy stone platform, the dark red medicine cauldron before him radiating a scorching heat that seemed to dry out even the surrounding air. An 8th grade elixir was no joke. The recipe alone required hundreds of rare medicinal herbs. For ordinary alchemists, simply keeping such an array of ingredients suspended in the air would have been enough to leave them flustered and overwhelmed. But for Xiao Yan, it was effortless. His immense soul power allowed him to handle everything with precision. One after another, the high-grade medicinal herbs were placed into the medicine cauldron. The flame curled gently under his control, perfectly extracting the pure medicinal essence from each herb and suspending it within the cauldron. Many of the herbs he was using were names most alchemists present had never even heard before. Watching his technique was eye-opening. The Isher Dan he was refining was said to be capable of summoning a 5-colored Dan Lei, a phenomenon most alchemists could only dream of witnessing. But to Xiao Yan, this was nothing out of the ordinary. His soul power, tempered over the years, had long since surpassed his past self by many times. Days passed as he worked. Even with the help of his strange flame, alchemy of this level took time. Each movement was smooth, each stage executed without error, and those watching found themselves completely immersed, losing all sense of time. Their awe toward Xiao Yan grew with each passing moment. The commotion drew more and more people. Alchemists who weren't part of the Dan Hall came to watch, and soon the area around the Dan Hall was packed with spectators. The crowd extended into the sky as flying figures hovered for a better view. Even powerful cultivators who were not alchemists came to see the event for themselves. Cai Lin had to send people to maintain order. Under countless gazes, 3 more days passed. On the 8th day, a sudden muffled thunder rolled through the air. Dark clouds gathered overhead, and lightning flickered across the sky. The Xianhuang fortress stirred in alarm. The energy within those clouds was terrifying. If it were to strike, half the fortress could be destroyed. At that moment, Xiao Yan slowly opened his eyes. The thunderclouds above seemed drawn to him, swirling and condensing into a magnificent 5-colored mass. This was the legendary colored Dan Lei. Every alchemist present looked up with a mixture of piety and fanatic excitement. To them, summoning such a Dan Lei was a feat they might not achieve even in a lifetime of effort. Suddenly, a massive 5-colored lightning bolt tore from the clouds, crashing straight toward Xiao Yan. Without hesitation, Xiao Yan snapped his fingers. From the shadows, the sky demon puppet leapt into the air, colliding head-on with the lightning. The thunderbolt vanished instantly upon impact. But the thunderclouds roared in anger, raining down pillars of 5-colored lightning one after another. The sky demon puppet met them all, blocking each strike with ease. The storm raged for over 10 minutes before it finally began to dissipate. Even the strongest of Dou Zun would have struggled to withstand such a display of heavenly might, and yet Xiao Yan had passed through it unscathed. He dismissed the sky demon puppet and opened the medicine cauldron. A dazzling rainbow shot into the air. Xiao Yan reached out, grasped it, and sealed it within a jade bottle before slipping it into his ring. The crowd erupted into thunderous cheers. The alchemist's eyes were red with excitement. For many, this was the first time they had witnessed an alchemist of this caliber. Someone who could summon and withstand Dan Lei of this level. Xiao Yan smiled faintly, sweeping his gaze across the Dan Hall's alchemists until it came to rest on Lu Chong and Wu Zhen. Both men's expressions grew stiff, and they avoided his eyes. This trip to the Dan Hall was not only about alchemy. Xiao Yan's voice dropped slightly, and the entire area fell silent. He reminded everyone that Dan Tang was a part of the Yen League, and was no different from any other sect within it. Yet in recent years, some had grown arrogant, disregarding the authority of the League and sowing seeds of discord. A serious crime. Xiao Yan produced a scroll and handed it to Cai Lin, instructing her to read it aloud. She unrolled the scroll, and her gaze swept coldly over the gathered alchemists. The names listed were those who had been arrogant, domineering, and guilty of misconduct, people who had even caused trouble without facing proper punishment. In the past, Cai Lin had endured these individuals for the sake of the Dan Hall's stability. But now that Xiao Yan was back, things would be different. She began reading. Hu Gu, for failing to follow orders, acting arrogantly, delaying the delivery of pills, and causing the deaths of hundreds of Yen League brothers. He Yuan Ming, for privately appropriating the League's medicinal resources, and assaulting the one who reported him. As the list continued, several alchemists turned pale. Then came the final announcement. Elder Lu Chong and Elder Wu Zhen, for pride in their own accomplishments, disobedience to orders, retreating from battle, secretly selling Yen League pills, and embezzling profits. The square erupted in an uproar. Lu Chong and Wu Zhen's faces went ashen. Xiao Yan's tone remained calm but absolute. The Yen League had its rules, and those who broke them would be punished. No exceptions. Lu Chong and Wu Zhen stepped forward, shouting that they were 7th grade senior alchemists, and that their contributions to the Dan Hall's growth were undeniable. They accused Xiao Yan of destroying the bridge after crossing it. Xiao Yan cut them off coldly, declaring that merits did not outweigh faults, and that the League was not a loose organization. If discipline collapsed, civil strife would soon follow. Furious, Lu Chong and Wu Zhen demanded to know who would join them in leaving. A small group of their loyal followers, aware that they would also face punishment, stepped forward to join them. The two elders smiled proudly, telling Xiao Yan that this place would no longer be theirs and bidding him farewell. But Xiao Yan's smile returned, slow and deliberate. He asked Cai Lin what the punishment should be for those who betrayed the alliance. Cai Lin's lips curved into a cold smile as she answered simply. Kill without mercy. Lu Chong and the others froze mid-step. They had always been arrogant, but now that they were openly attempting to betray the League, Xiao Yan would never let them go. He ordered their capture. Yen League experts, already prepared, moved instantly, subduing them. Lu Chong and Wu Zhen tried to resist, but Xiao Yan's palm shattered their fighting spirit, leaving them no choice but to be taken away. Their followers were also dragged off, their cries echoing across the square. A cold sweat broke out among the remaining alchemists. No one dared to speak. Xiao Yan's gaze swept over them before he made a new announcement. Gu He, for poor management, was to be demoted to Deputy Hall Master. Fa Ma was promoted to head of the Dan Hall. Both men were surprised, but accepted the decision respectfully. Xiao Yan continued, acknowledging the Dan Hall's progress over recent years, but emphasizing that the rules could not be broken. As a reward for those loyal to the League, he revealed an ancient soul cultivation technique. Any alchemist who contributed to the League could earn this secret. The alchemist's eyes lit up. Soul cultivation was invaluable to them, and such a method was a treasure beyond measure. Cai Lin felt relieved. She had feared that Xiao Yan's punishments might intimidate the others, but his combination of strict discipline and generous reward would only strengthen loyalty. Even Gu he felt grateful. Xiao Yan remained in the Xianhuang fortress for 2 more days. Refining an 8th grade pill had been exhausting, and he needed rest. During this time, he and Cai Lin discussed Xiao Xiao. Xiao Yan took out the Isher Dan he had refined, intending to give it to her. Cai Lin worried that such a powerful elixir might overwhelm the child, but Xiao Yan reassured her. Despite its strength, the pill's effects were gentle and perfectly suited for Xiao Xiao, working slowly within her as she grew. Cai Lin relaxed. She watched as Xiao Yan fed the pill to Xiao Xiao. The little one yawned and quickly fell asleep, the initial medicinal effects beginning to take hold. Cai Lin stroked her daughter's cheek, her expression soft and full of maternal warmth. Xiao Yan watched the scene, touched, and asked Cai Lin what she thought of having a simple wedding. She trembled slightly, her cheeks flushing. Xiao Yan stepped forward, pulling her gently into his arms. Under her passionate gaze, he kissed her, and the room filled with a warm, tender atmosphere. The winds of change are sweeping through the Yan alliance. Will Xiao Yan's leadership bring harmony to the Alchemy Hall, or ignite even more conflict? And with his wedding to Cai Lin approaching, what new twists await? Don't miss episode 160 of Fighting Through the Heavens.